Hey guys, and welcome back to this class, Data Science, Deep Learning in Python Part 2. So in this lecture, we're going to look at Tensorflow, and we're going to do Tensorflow Basics, which is going to be analogous to Theano Basics. It's going to introduce basic variables and functions and expressions and shows you how you can optimize a simple function. I compare this to Theano1.py multiple times, so you might want to check that out first if you haven't. So let's just do our usual imports. Alright, so we had a little hiccup because NumPy was not at the latest version. So when I used pip, the latest version was 1.8 RC. And when I use easy install, the latest version was 1.11. So you may want to update using easy install if your NumPy is not currently at the latest version. So let's do our imports again. And so in TensorFlow, a placeholder is like a Theano variable. So let's create a matrix. The first thing we pass in is the type. And we have to pass this in. We can tell it the shape, but we don't have to. And we can give it a name, but we don't have to. So we can create a vector. And not give it a shape or a name. And we can do a matrix multiplication, similar to what we did in Theano, but I feel like matmul is a little more appropriate than dot. Now, similar to Theano, you need to feed the variables values. So A and V don't yet have values. In TensorFlow, you do the actual work in what is called a session. So you can open a session like this. And I'm going to run my matrix multiplication. And so session takes in a feed dict, and so that's how you tell it what A is and what V is. And so you can use NumPy to send in these values. And so let's print out output and its type just to see what it gives us. Okay, so gives us back a NumPy array. Notice that this isn't really like NumPy, where you can omit this last dimension. So TensorFlow does real matrix multiplication. And so now we're going to have a variable that we're going to update using gradient descent. So I'm going to show you one example first. You can create a TensorFlow variable. You can pass in a TensorFlow random normal as its initial value, or you can also pass in a NumPy array. And you can also make your variable a scalar. So with TensorFlow variables, you need to initialize them. You can use the initialize all variables function to do that. This actually returns a thing that you have to call in the session later. So let's open a session. Let's run our init. Let's just print out to see what we get. So we get none. You can also print out the values of your TensorFlow variables using the eval function. But that's after you run an init. So now let's try to find the minimum of a simple cost function like we did in Theano. So let's create a variable, initialize it to 20, just like we did in Theano. Create the same cost function. And so one difference between Theano and TensorFlow is that you don't write the updates yourself in TensorFlow. Instead, what you do is you choose an optimizer, and TensorFlow has a bunch of these that implements the algorithm that you want. So, for example, gradient descent optimizer is just regular gradient descent. You pass in 0.3 as the learning rate, and if you want to know more about the params, you can check their documentation, and then you tell it what expression you want to minimize. So we're going to again initialize our variables. And then open our session. And so we have to write the loop ourselves. So we're going to run the train function, and we're going to print the cost and the value of the parameter on each iteration. Okay, so it gives us the expected answer.